What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Dorothy sat in her worn armchair by the window of her small Ohio farmhouse, the evening light fading behind the rolling fields she'd watched change over 6 decades. Her fingers traced the frayed edge of a knitted blanket, a gift from her granddaughter who lived miles away in a city that seemed as distant as a different world. The TV murmured quietly, a news anchor talking about the latest space mission, but Dorothy's attention was elsewhere. The power had flickered off again, cutting her off from the internet and the video calls she treasured, her only real link to family. She felt a hollow ache settle in her chest, that familiar weight of being left behind, of watching life speed past when she could barely keep up. The neighbors had internet, of course, but out here, beyond the last telephone pole, the world felt silent and still. She thought about the years, how her hands once held books that carried her dreams, how her voice once animated stories for children in the school library where she had worked for nearly 30 years. But now, at 68, Dorothy felt like a fading signal, a message lost in static. As the radio crackled to life with a local broadcast, a voice cut through her gloom. It was a clip from Elon Musk, talking about Starlink, his plan to launch thousands of satellites to bring internet to the most remote corners of the Earth. Connecting the unconnected, he said. Reaching places that have never had access before. We're not just building technology, we're building the future. Dorothy leaned closer, her heart stirring with a sudden flicker of hope. Could this be for her? For her town? What if this was the spark she'd been waiting for? For so long, she'd felt invisible, like an outdated relic in a world racing toward tomorrow. But Musk's words challenged that. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe this was the moment everything could change. She whispered to herself, what if I'm not too old to learn? To connect? To matter? That night, as she prepared for bed, she pulled out an old notebook from the drawer, pages yellowed but full of ideas and memories. Her hands trembled slightly, but determination replaced doubt. Tomorrow, she would find out what Starlink really meant for her and her neighbors. The cold fear of loneliness was still there, but so was a new spark, a signal found in the silence. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? She murmured aloud, feeling a connection to a world far beyond her little farmhouse, a world she was ready to reach for again. Dorothy often found herself drifting back to the days when life felt full of promise and possibility, before the silence had crept in around her like a slow fog. She remembered the scent of old books stacked high in the library where she had spent most of her adult life. The polished wooden shelves, the faint smell of ink and paper, the quiet murmur of children discovering worlds beyond their own. Those had been the days when she was more than just a fading figure in a quiet town, she was a guide, a storyteller, a keeper of knowledge. She had been passionate then, her eyes bright behind thick glasses, her hands always busy cataloging books or organizing community events. She had dreamed of travel, of seeing the ocean that her mother had described in letters from her youth, of meeting people from different places and hearing their stories. But life had its own way of reshaping those dreams. Marriage came young, then children, and the years slipped by in routines that sometimes felt like both comfort and cage. Her husband, Walter, had been a steady presence, kind, practical, a man of the land who loved their small farm and the quiet rhythms of rural Ohio. They had shared laughter and struggles, celebrations and losses, but as the children grew and moved away, the house grew quieter, too. Walter had passed 5 years ago, leaving Dorothy alone with memories that sometimes weighed heavier than the silence around her. Her children lived in distant cities, busy with their own lives, their calls less frequent, their visits rarer. She understood, she told herself, she didn't want to be a burden. Yet the loneliness gnawed at her, especially in the long winter nights when the wind howled outside and the power sometimes failed. She felt invisible to a world that prized youth and speed, a world where her hands, once so nimble turning pages, now trembled slightly as she tried to master a smartphone or tablet. She had always been quick to learn when it came to books and stories, but this new digital age felt like a language she didn't speak, a place where she was left behind. There were regrets, too, that she carried quietly. Regrets about the trips never taken, the letters never sent, the moments missed because fear or fatigue held her back. She thought about the time she hadn't called her daughter after a fight, the chance to say, "I love you," lost in stubborn silence. The ache of missed connections was a shadow she couldn't shake. One memory stood out above the rest, a symbol of the life she once dreamed of and the person she felt she had lost. It was a summer afternoon in her early 30s, when she had sat by the riverbank with a journal in hand, writing about the books she wanted to write, the adventures she longed to have. The sun had warmed her face, the water had sparkled, and for a moment, she felt limitless. That version of Dorothy, the young woman with hope shining in her eyes, seemed like a stranger now. But she clung to the memory like a lifeline, a reminder that beneath the years and the weariness, she still existed. That she still mattered. As Dorothy sat by the window now, watching the fields darken under a September sky, she wondered if that young woman might still be found, if there was a way back to that spark. The library was gone, closed down after budget cuts and dwindling attendance, a casualty of changing times. But the books, the stories, and the dreams they inspired lived on inside her. It was in this quiet moment of reflection that the voice of Elon Musk from the radio broadcast seemed to echo louder. His talk about pushing boundaries, about daring to build what others said was impossible, it stirred something deep within her. The idea that innovation wasn't just for the young, that change was possible at any age, felt like a challenge wrapped in a promise. Dorothy realized that maybe she didn't have to be a relic of the past. Maybe she could find a way to bridge her history with this new world, to connect her community with the future that Musk was envisioning. She thought about the children she once read to, the neighbors who struggled with the internet or cell service, the grandchild whose face appeared only in fleeting pixels on a screen. She wanted to reach them all. To help them feel seen, heard, and connected. But first, she had to wrestle with the fears inside her, the fear of failure, of embarrassment, of being left behind again. She remembered the words of a friend who once told her, "You're never too old to learn something new." But it wasn't just learning, it was about daring to believe that she still had something to offer, that her time was not over. That night, she opened the notebook again and began to write, not stories from books, but stories from her heart. Plans for community workshops, ideas for technology classes for seniors, notes about Starlink and what it might bring. For the first time in years, she felt a flicker of excitement, a quiet determination. Maybe this was her next chapter, a chance to rewrite the story of what it meant to grow old in a changing world. She folded the notebook carefully and set it on the bedside table, a small but powerful reminder that the life before the shift was just the beginning. Tomorrow, she would take her first steps toward the future. And maybe, just maybe, the lost dreams would find their way home. Dorothy woke with a heaviness in her chest, the dawn's pale light filtering through thin curtains, revealing the quiet of her empty house. The silence was both familiar and suffocating. She moved slowly to the kitchen, the worn linoleum cold underfoot, and brewed her morning coffee, the bitter aroma a small comfort against the fog of doubt settling in her mind. Lately, the weight of being disconnected felt unbearable, not just in the technical sense but in every part of her life. She glanced at her phone lying on the counter, its screen dark, untouched for hours. She wanted to call her daughter, but the words tangled in her throat. Last time they spoke, her daughter had been impatient, asking why she didn't just get with the times, and use video calls more often. "Mom, you have to keep up," she'd said sharply. The sting of that conversation lingered, a reminder of how far apart they'd grown. It was easier to avoid the calls, the judgment, the feeling that she was a burden rather than a bridge. Dorothy's doctor hadn't been kinder. "You need to slow down," he said during her last checkup, concern etched in his voice. "Your heart's not what it used to be, and stress isn't helping." But how could she slow down when every day felt like a race to stay relevant? When even basic things like paying bills or ordering groceries had become mountains she hesitated to climb. The world around her seemed to move faster than she could catch, and every failure chipped away at her confidence. Then there was the community, neighbors who treated her like a relic, like someone better left to fade into the background. They spoke about young people's problems and the digital age as if Dorothy's decades of wisdom and experience had no place in the conversation. Yet, deep inside, she felt a storm of rebellion. She wanted to scream that she was still here, still capable of change, still yearning to connect. The spark from Elon Musk's speech on the radio echoed in her mind, reaching places that have never had access before. It wasn't just about satellites or technology, it was about people like her, isolated but not invisible. She had taped a quote from him to her fridge months ago: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Some days, those words were a lifeline. Others, they felt like a cruel joke. Today was one of the harder days. She had tried to log into the local library's digital archives, hoping to find old community photos to share with her granddaughter. The screen refused to load, spinning endlessly like a wheel stuck in time. Frustration bubbled up, tears threatening to spill, but Dorothy clenched her jaw and turned off the device. "Is it too late?" she whispered to the empty room. "Does anyone care?" The questions felt like knives twisting in her heart. But then, as if summoned by her desperation, a news alert popped up on her cracked phone screen: Starlink satellites to bring high-speed internet to rural America. She read the words over and over, disbelief mixing with hope. Was this the chance she had been waiting for? Could this technology finally break through the isolation? Dorothy knew there would be hurdles: the cost, the learning curve, the skepticism from those around her. Her son had already told her it was a waste of time, that she should accept the way things are. But something inside her stirred, a quiet, stubborn flame refusing to be snuffed out. She thought about the moments when she felt most alive, helping a child discover the magic of a story, reconnecting with an old friend over a cup of tea, hearing her granddaughter's laughter over a crackling phone line. Those moments were worth fighting for. That afternoon, Dorothy found herself scrolling through a podcast featuring Elon Musk, his voice calm but determined as he described the vision of a connected world where no one was left behind. "We're not just building satellites," he said, "we're building bridges, bridges of hope, knowledge, and opportunity." The word struck a chord. What if she could be part of that bridge? What if she could help others in her community find the same hope? But as the hope flickered, reality pushed back. A call from her daughter brought the familiar sting of doubt. "Mom, I just don't have time to help you figure this out," she said. "Maybe you should just accept that some things are changing too fast." Dorothy's throat tightened, but this time, she didn't back down. "I'm not ready to give up," she said quietly. "Not yet." That night, she sat by the window again, the stars blinking silently overhead, feeling the vastness of the sky and the possibility it held. The inner war raged on, but so did a new determination. Dorothy realized that the battle wasn't just about technology or connection, it was about reclaiming her place in a world that often seemed to forget people like her. She thought about Elon Musk's risk-taking spirit, his refusal to accept limitations, and she wondered if she could borrow some of that courage. The road ahead was uncertain and filled with challenges, but Dorothy knew one thing for sure: she would not fade away quietly. She was ready to fight for connection, for relevance, for love. Tomorrow, she would find out how to bring the satellites closer to her door, how to bridge the gap between the past and the future. She might stumble, she might fall, but she would rise again. Because sometimes, the greatest battles are fought not in boardrooms or launch pads, but in the quiet moments of a small farmhouse, where hope refuses to die. And in that moment, Dorothy felt the first true glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window as Dorothy sipped her coffee, the bitter warmth grounding her thoughts. She had made a decision. No more waiting, no more watching from the sidelines. Today, she would step into the future, one small but bold step at a time. The flyer had caught her eye last week. An announcement for a town meeting about a new satellite internet service called Starlink coming to their rural area. She had hesitated at first, unsure if this was for her or just another promise that would fade like so many others. But the spark Elon Musk had ignited in her refused to dim. She dressed carefully, choosing her most comfortable shoes and a worn cardigan that had seen better days but carried the warmth of familiarity. Walking to the community center felt like crossing a threshold, leaving behind the safe confines of her quiet home and stepping into a room buzzing with curiosity and cautious hope. Inside, a small crowd had gathered, farmers, parents, retirees, and young people eager for the chance to connect to a world that often left them on the edge. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the walls decorated with flyers about upcoming classes and events. Dorothy found a seat near the back, feeling the flutter of nerves mingling with anticipation. The meeting began with a representative from the local internet cooperative explaining the Starlink program, a constellation of satellites orbiting above, beaming high-speed internet to even the most remote places. "It's revolutionary," the speaker said, eyes shining with enthusiasm. "No longer will rural communities be left in the dark. This is a chance to bring education, healthcare, and economic opportunity within reach." Dorothy listened intently, the technical jargon slowly making sense as she pictured the tiny satellites spinning silently in space, connecting her farm to distant cities, schools, and families. Questions flew from the audience, about costs, installation, reliability. Dorothy raised her hand, her voice steady despite the flutter of butterflies. "How can someone like me, who's never been good with technology, get involved? Can this really change things for people my age?" The room fell quiet, then the representative smiled warmly. "Absolutely. We're organizing volunteer teams to help install equipment and offer training. No experience needed, just a willingness to learn." Dorothy's heart quickened. She had never imagined herself volunteering for anything so tech-forward, but the possibility felt exhilarating. After the meeting, she stayed behind to speak with the coordinator, a young woman named Mia who radiated energy and patience. Mia listened as Dorothy shared her fears and hopes, then handed her a brochure and a sign-up sheet. "We'd love to have you join us. You'll be a vital part of this community's future." The walk home felt lighter, her steps more purposeful. She pulled out her notebook again and began sketching a plan, a schedule for neighborhood workshops, a list of friends and neighbors who might need help, ideas for simple tech guides written in plain language. For the first time in years, Dorothy felt like she was planting seeds for something new. That evening, she called her daughter, her voice steady as she shared what she had learned and her plan to help bring Starlink to their town. Her daughter's tone was skeptical but softened by surprise. "Mom, I'm proud of you. If anyone can figure this out, it's you." The words warmed Dorothy like a summer breeze. The next days were filled with preparations. Dorothy practiced asking questions about technology, watched tutorials on basic internet functions, and reached out to neighbors who seemed curious but hesitant. She discovered that many, like her, felt overwhelmed by the rapid pace of change but yearned for connection. One afternoon, she helped install the first Starlink dish on the roof of the local school. Standing beneath the clear blue sky, watching the equipment align with satellites miles above, Dorothy felt a surge of pride and possibility. This small act was more than just setting up a piece of technology, it was a declaration that she and her community were not forgotten, that they had a place in the future. The following weeks brought challenges, the frustration of slow downloads, technical glitches, and moments when Dorothy doubted her ability to keep up. But each small victory built confidence, both in herself and in those she helped. Her granddaughter called more often now, and their conversations grew longer and richer. Dorothy even started a simple blog to share stories and tips, her fingers slowly gaining strength on the keyboard. She found herself waking each morning with a new sense of purpose, a feeling she hadn't known since her days at the library. Through it all, Elon Musk's voice remained a quiet guide in her mind, reminding her that fearlessness wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to keep going despite it. Dorothy realized that the one thing she had changed wasn't just her internet connection, it was her mindset. She had moved from isolation to action, from despair to hope. And that shift was beginning to ripple through her community, weaving a new network of connection and possibility. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Dorothy stood outside her farmhouse, looking up at the vast sky where Musk's satellites silently orbited. She whispered a quiet thank you to the man she'd never met but who had sparked a transformation she never thought possible. The journey was far from over, but Dorothy knew this moment, the moment she chose to step forward, was the true turning point. The future was no longer a distant dream, it was within her reach. Dorothy sat in her living room, the soft glow of her laptop screen illuminating her determined face. For weeks now, she had been working tirelessly to build something that felt almost impossible, a bridge between her small town and the vast, buzzing digital world. The blog she started had begun as a simple experiment, a way to share what she was learning about Starlink and satellite internet, but now it was becoming something much bigger. Comments from neighbors poured in, thank yous, questions, even stories of their own struggles with isolation and connection. Each message was a lifeline, a reminder that she was not alone. One afternoon, while scrolling through her inbox, Dorothy noticed an unfamiliar email subject line, "Your story inspired me." Her heart quickened as she opened it to find a message from a journalist working for a regional news outlet. The reporter had come across Dorothy's blog and wanted to tell her story, how a woman in her late 60s was leading the charge to bring satellite internet to her rural community. "You're the spark we need," the email said. "Would you be willing to share your journey?" Dorothy hesitated for only a moment before typing a heartfelt yes. She knew this was a moment she couldn't let slip away. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone interviews, photo shoots in her kitchen surrounded by Starlink equipment, and conversations that forced her to confront how far she had come, and how far she still wanted to go. When the article published, it spread quickly. Suddenly, Dorothy's quiet life was filled with phone calls and messages from strangers who saw in her a symbol of hope and resilience. People from other towns asked how they could start their own satellite internet projects. Her story became a beacon, proving that age was no barrier to innovation or impact. But the breakthrough wasn't just external. Dorothy felt it most deeply when her daughter called after reading the article. "Mom," she said softly, "I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you couldn't do this. You've shown me what it means to keep fighting." Tears filled Dorothy's eyes as they talked long into the night, mending old wounds and building new bridges. Around town, neighbors began to gather more often, sharing experiences and ideas sparked by Dorothy's leadership. The local school saw improvements as online resources became accessible. Even Walter's old farm, once a symbol of quiet decline, now hummed with the promise of new possibilities. Dorothy still faced challenges, the technology sometimes faltered, and there were days when her energy waned. But she met each obstacle with a newfound grit, inspired by the example of Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of the impossible. She realized that her journey mirrored his in many ways, the risks, the setbacks, the courage to keep dreaming when the world doubted. One chilly evening, as she stood outside watching the sky, Dorothy felt a profound connection to the satellites spinning silently overhead. They were more than machines, they were symbols of a world reaching out to those once left in the dark. She whispered to the night, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." In that moment, surrounded by the vastness of space and the warmth of newfound community, Dorothy knew she had broken through, not just the barriers of technology but the walls that age and fear had built around her heart. The silence was gone. The signal was strong. And the future was hers to shape. The first light of dawn spilled gently over Dorothy's farmhouse, casting long shadows across the fields that had witnessed so many seasons of change. She stood by the window, a quiet smile playing at the corners of her lips as she watched the world awaken, birds flitting through the air like tiny messengers of hope. The journey that had begun with a flicker of doubt had blossomed into something she could hardly have imagined. A new legacy not built on grand monuments but on connection, courage, and the quiet power of one person daring to change. Dorothy's life was no longer defined by what had been lost or by the weight of years that seemed to drag her down. Instead, it was shaped by the ripples she had set in motion, neighbors gathering to learn, children discovering worlds beyond their small town, families reunited through screens that once felt like barriers. The community center where she had first heard about Starlink was now alive with workshops she helped lead. Her voice, once tentative, rang clear and strong as she taught others how to embrace technology, how to turn fear into opportunity. She had become more than a participant, she was a guide, a symbol of transformation. Her granddaughter, Emma, had become her most enthusiastic student and companion, their bond deepening as they navigated the digital frontier together. Emma's laughter filled the house more often now, a bright thread weaving the past and future into something new. Dorothy often reflected on the words she had whispered that cold night under the stars, "I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again." She realized that permission had come not from outside but from within, from the decision to believe in herself, to embrace change, and to fight for connection. The satellite internet was more than a technology, it was a lifeline that carried dreams, knowledge, and love across distances. She thought about Walter, the steady man who had loved the land and the simple rhythms of life. She felt a quiet pride knowing that this legacy was not about leaving the past behind but about building upon it, honoring the foundation they had laid while reaching for new horizons. The blog she started had grown into a platform for stories from seniors across America, each sharing their own struggles and triumphs in the digital age. Dorothy read their words with awe and humility, reminded that her story was part of a larger tapestry of resilience. One afternoon, as she prepared for a community event celebrating the anniversary of the Starlink project's arrival, Dorothy received a call that brought tears to her eyes. A representative from a national nonprofit invited her to speak at a conference about rural connectivity and aging. "Your story is inspiring, Dorothy," the voice said warmly. "We want others to hear how you turn technology into hope." Standing before a crowd months later, Dorothy shared her journey, the fears, the setbacks, the small victories that led to this moment. She spoke not just as an advocate for technology but as a living testament to the power of perseverance and the refusal to be forgotten. The applause that followed was not just for her but for every person who had ever felt left behind and found a way forward. Back home, Dorothy often sat on her porch in the evening, the sky alive with stars and the soft hum of satellites overhead. She thought about the future, not just hers but for the generations to come. The internet had connected more than devices, it had connected hearts and minds, bridging gaps that once seemed insurmountable. She knew there would still be challenges, new battles to face, but she was ready. Because she had learned that the true legacy wasn't about how many years she had lived but how fully she chose to live them. The story of a woman in rural Ohio who embraced change, sparked community, and found purpose in the unlikeliest of places was now woven into the fabric of a country slowly awakening to the potential of its elders. Dorothy closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of life around her, and whispered a promise, to keep pushing forward, to keep planting seeds of hope, and to keep shining her light. The moment of her shift had become a movement, a testament that it was never too late to start again. And in that truth, Dorothy found peace, power, and an unshakable sense of belonging. Dorothy woke to the sound of birdsong mingling with the distant hum of a tractor starting up in a neighboring field. The familiar rural morning stirred a mix of nostalgia and excitement in her chest. She pulled back the curtains, sunlight spilling across the kitchen table cluttered with notes, emails, and a steaming cup of tea. Today wasn't just another day, it was the beginning of a new chapter that stretched far beyond the walls of her old farmhouse. For years, Dorothy's world had been contained by fading memories and the quiet isolation of small-town life. But now, thanks to the satellite internet connecting her and her community to the wider world, horizons that once seemed unreachable were opening up like never before. She felt the pulse of possibility buzzing through her veins, as though the very stars overhead whispered encouragement. With a steady breath, Dorothy logged onto her computer to check messages from the new online support group she helped create. A gathering place for seniors across the country learning to embrace technology and share their stories. The group's chat window flickered with greetings, laughter, and words of encouragement. "Hello from Arizona. Just learned how to video call my grandson. Thanks for inspiring me, Dorothy." The warmth of connection reached through the screen, crossing miles and time zones to remind her that she was part of something greater, a movement of elders refusing to be left behind. Inspired, Dorothy began drafting a newsletter to share upcoming workshops, inspirational stories, and tips on navigating the digital world. She thought back to when the journey had seemed so daunting, the tangled wires, confusing jargon, and moments when she felt like giving up. Now, those struggles were stepping stones leading to new friendships, new skills, and a rekindled purpose. The morning slipped by in a whirl of activity. Dorothy helped a neighbor troubleshoot a slow internet connection, encouraged a hesitant newcomer to join their video meeting, and shared a laugh over a recipe swap in their group chat. Each interaction reinforced the truth she was living: connection was more than technology, it was the human spirit reaching out across divides. That afternoon, Dorothy packed a small bag and prepared to leave the farmhouse for the first time in months to attend a regional conference on rural innovation. She felt a nervous excitement flutter in her stomach. This wasn't just a trip, it was a symbol of how far she'd come. At the conference, she was greeted by a vibrant crowd of entrepreneurs, tech experts, community leaders, and fellow seniors, all passionate about creating change. The energy was electric, the conversations flowing easily as ideas sparked and alliances formed. Dorothy found herself at the center of conversations about digital inclusion, community resilience, and the power of stories to inspire transformation. She shared her own journey, describing the moment when Elon Musk's vision sparked a fire within her, a fire that led her to champion satellite internet for her town and beyond. The audience listened intently, many nodding with recognition and hope. During a panel discussion, Dorothy met a young engineer named Carlos who was developing apps designed specifically for older adults, tools to make communication easier and more intuitive. They talked for hours, brainstorming ways to collaborate, and Dorothy felt the thrill of partnership, a bridge between generations built on shared goals and mutual respect. That evening, as she stood on the hotel balcony watching city lights twinkle below, Dorothy marveled at the contrast between the bustling urban skyline and the quiet fields she called home. Yet, in that contrast, she saw a beautiful truth. No matter where she was, connection could be forged. Technology was the thread, but courage and openness wove the fabric. Returning home, Dorothy felt renewed. She poured her energy into expanding the community group's reach, organizing virtual events that brought experts and seniors together, and advocating for better infrastructure to ensure reliable internet access for all. She received calls from other rural leaders asking for advice, grateful for the example she was setting. Through it all, Dorothy never lost sight of what mattered most: the human stories behind the screens. She visited a local assisted living center, helping residents connect with family members for the first time in years. She celebrated when a shy retiree learned to send an email, when a widow reconnected with a childhood friend through social media. These small victories were the heartbeat of her mission. At home, Dorothy's bond with Emma deepened as they explored the digital landscape together. Video calls, online games, and even coding tutorials sparked new laughter and learning. Dorothy realized that the future wasn't a distant place waiting to be reached, it was being created every day, with every connection made, every fear faced, every step forward taken. Late one night, as she gazed at the stars, Dorothy felt a profound sense of peace. The journey from isolation to empowerment had not been easy, but it had been worth every struggle. She knew challenges lay ahead, but she was ready. Because the true horizon wasn't defined by geography or technology, it was defined by the human spirit's unyielding capacity to adapt, to grow, and to connect. And in that spirit, Dorothy found endless possibility. Despite the momentum Dorothy had built and the bright future she envisioned, there came a morning when doubt crept back into her thoughts like a chill wind slipping through the cracks. She awoke with a heavy heart, the familiar anxieties gnawing at the edges of her mind. Was this really sustainable? Could a woman her age keep leading this charge into the digital unknown? The weight of loneliness, the fears of becoming irrelevant, whispered their familiar song. As she sat quietly in her worn armchair, the hum of her computer idle beside her, Dorothy's mind wandered to the days before Starlink came to her town, days when even the simplest act of connecting with the world felt like climbing a mountain. She recalled how isolated she once felt, how easy it was to slip into the shadows of forgotten time. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her email and saw the flood of messages and invitations that had once made her heart soar. Now, the same messages felt overwhelming, a reminder of expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. A message from a skeptical neighbor caught her eye. Is all this technology really for us? Or is it just a distraction from what matters? The note read. Dorothy's fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure how to respond. She understood the sentiment deeply, the fear that embracing the new might mean losing the old. Later that day, during a community meeting, some voices of doubt emerged among the hopeful crowd. Is this really worth it? An elderly man asked. I'm not sure I want to live my last years tangled up in screens and satellites. Another woman chimed in, we worked hard our whole lives. Maybe it's time to slow down, not speed up. Dorothy felt the sting of their words, but also the urgency to respond, not with defensiveness but with empathy. She shared her own story honestly, admitting that there were days she questioned herself, that learning new things was hard and sometimes frightening. But she reminded them of the times they had all faced change before, how they had adapted, survived, and thrived. We're not replacing the past, Dorothy said softly. We're building on it. Using new tools to keep the connections alive, to open doors that once seemed closed. The room was silent, then a few nods, hesitant but hopeful. Yet even as she spoke, Dorothy grappled with her own inner war. The fear of failure, of becoming obsolete, lingered like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. That night, she turned to Elon Musk's interviews and quotes, seeking strength in the voice of a man who seemed to defy limits with relentless energy. One line stood out, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Those words settled like a balm on her restless mind. She realized that the struggle was part of the journey, the clash between fear and hope, doubt and determination. The next morning, Dorothy decided to take a different approach. Instead of pushing forward alone, she invited others into the process, encouraging them to share their fears and dreams openly. Together, they began to build a support network. Not just for tech help but for emotional strength. They held storytelling nights where people shared memories and hopes, weaving the fabric of their community tighter than ever. Slowly, the shadows receded as light returned in the form of shared courage. Dorothy's granddaughter, Emma, became a vital part of this new chapter, reminding her that learning was a lifelong process and that even setbacks were steps forward. Emma's patience and enthusiasm helped Dorothy see that it was okay to stumble, to ask for help, and to keep trying. The community began to embrace this new rhythm, a balance of honoring the past while stepping boldly into the future. Dorothy found herself reflecting on the lessons of resilience and the power of connection beyond technology, how empathy and understanding bridged generational gaps and healed old wounds. Through the struggle, Dorothy emerged stronger, more grounded in the truth that transformation was messy and imperfect but profoundly worth it. And as she looked out at the night sky, the satellites continuing their silent dance, she whispered a quiet promise, to face the doubts, embrace the fears, and keep moving forward with heart and courage. The crisp morning air carried a sense of possibility as Dorothy sat at her kitchen table, her fingers poised above the keyboard. Today, she was going to do something she had avoided for years, reach out to her estranged son, Mark. Their last conversation, years ago, had ended in frustration and silence, a gulf widening with time and unresolved pain. Yet the work she had done to rebuild her own life, rekindling connections, embracing change, and finding her voice, had stirred a longing deep within her to mend the most important relationship of all. For years, Dorothy had wrestled with regret. Missed birthdays, broken promises, and the quiet ache of absence shadowed her days. She had told herself it was too late, that Mark had moved on, that the past was a chasm too wide to cross. But the words of Elon Musk echoed in her mind, his fearlessness in facing challenges, his belief that setbacks were just steps on the path to something greater. With a deep breath, Dorothy began to type an email. The words were simple but sincere, I've been thinking about you. I want to try again, if you're willing." She hesitated only briefly before hitting send, her heart pounding as the message slipped into the digital ether. Days passed with no response, each one heavier than the last. Doubt crept in again, whispering that maybe some bridges were meant to stay burned. But Dorothy held on to hope, reminded that healing was not always immediate, that the seed she planted today might take time to grow. Then one evening, as she sat by the window watching the stars begin to twinkle, a new email notification lit up her screen. Mark had replied. His message was cautious but open, an invitation to talk, to start the slow work of understanding and forgiveness. Over the next weeks, they exchanged emails, sharing memories, apologies, and stories of their separate journeys. Technology, once a barrier, became a bridge. Video calls followed, awkward at first but gradually warm, filled with laughter, tears, and rediscovery. Dorothy felt a joy she hadn't dared imagine, the chance to rebuild, to rewrite the story of their relationship with empathy and love. The reconnection rippled outward. Mark, inspired by his mother's courage, began to involve himself in the community projects she championed. Together, they organized workshops teaching families how to use technology to stay close despite distance and busy lives. Their story became a powerful example of how it was never too late to heal, to change, to connect. Dorothy's heart swelled with gratitude for the journey, from isolation to community, from silence to conversation. The network she had helped build was no longer just about internet access, it was about restoring bonds, empowering voices, and creating a future where age and distance no longer defined connection. One afternoon, as she watched the satellites glide silently overhead, Dorothy reflected on the profound lessons she had learned. Change required bravery, yes, but also patience and vulnerability. It meant risking hurt for the chance to grow. And above all, it meant believing in the possibility of new beginnings. In the quiet of her home, surrounded by the hum of technology and the warmth of renewed family, Dorothy whispered a truth she wished for everyone who felt lost or forgotten: no matter how far apart we seem, connection is always possible. It starts with one brave step. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Dorothy felt a peace settle over her. The journey was far from over, but with each bridge rebuilt and each heart opened, the path ahead grew clearer. The future was not just a distant dream, it was here, shaped by those willing to reach out and hold on. Dorothy's small town was no longer the quiet, forgotten place she had once known. The changes sparked by satellite internet had woven new threads into the fabric of daily life, transforming isolation into connection and stagnation into momentum. On any given morning, the local diner buzzed with conversations about the latest community projects, technology tips, and stories of rediscovered dreams. Dorothy, once seen as just another face fading into the background, had become a catalyst for change, her journey a beacon of hope that rippled far beyond her own front porch. The transformation was not without its challenges. Infrastructure needed constant upkeep, some neighbors struggled to keep up with new devices and software. But the spirit of collaboration was strong, fueled by the determination to ensure no one was left behind. At the heart of it all was Dorothy, whose leadership was marked not by grand speeches but by listening, encouraging, and celebrating every small victory. One afternoon, the town held its first annual Connectivity Festival, a celebration of progress and unity. The streets filled with laughter and music as booths offered tutorials on everything from setting up video calls to starting online businesses. Children displayed digital art projects, and elders shared stories through video diaries, connecting generations in new and meaningful ways. Dorothy stood on the main stage, her voice steady and warm as she addressed the crowd. "This festival is more than a celebration of technology," she said. "It's a celebration of community, the strength we find when we come together, learn from one another, and refuse to be defined by age or circumstance." The applause was heartfelt, a testament to how far they had come. Behind the scenes, Dorothy worked tirelessly, coordinating volunteers, securing resources, and mentoring newcomers. Her days were full but fulfilling, each moment a thread in the tapestry she was helping weave. The town schools saw remarkable changes, with students accessing online resources that brought the world into their classrooms. Teachers reported increased engagement and curiosity, while parents found new ways to support learning at home. For many, the satellite internet was a lifeline not just for information but for connection to a future once unimaginable. Dorothy's relationship with Mark deepened as they collaborated on community outreach, blending their strengths and healing old wounds through shared purpose. Together, they launched initiatives to help seniors learn digital skills, creating safe, welcoming spaces for questions and experimentation. Emma, growing more confident each day, became a tech mentor herself, bridging generations with patience and enthusiasm. Yet, even amid progress, Dorothy remained grounded. She understood that transformation was a journey, not a destination. There were still moments of doubt, frustration, and fatigue, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they were fuel, reminders of the resilience that had carried her through. One evening, as the festival lights dimmed and the town settled into a quiet night, Dorothy sat on her porch reflecting on the ripple effect of one small spark. She thought back to the moment she first heard Elon Musk speak about the power of satellites to connect the unconnected, a vision that had ignited a fire within her and set this journey in motion. That vision had become a reality not because of technology alone but because of courage, connection, and the refusal to give up. Dorothy's story had become intertwined with the lives of her neighbors, family, and countless others who found new purpose in embracing change. She realized that the true legacy she was creating wasn't just about faster internet or modern devices, it was about empowering people to believe in themselves, to dream again, and to build communities where everyone mattered. As she looked up at the stars, satellites tracing their silent arcs across the sky, Dorothy felt a profound sense of gratitude and possibility. The future was no longer a distant horizon but a living, breathing reality shaped by those who dared to connect, to change, and to hope. And in that truth, she found a strength that would carry her, and her community, into whatever came next. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Dorothy's kitchen, casting delicate patterns on the table scattered with notes and a half-finished cup of coffee. She sat quietly, headphones on, listening to a podcast where Elon Musk was being interviewed about his vision for the future, his relentless drive to push boundaries, to make the impossible possible. His words were a familiar fuel, but today they struck a deeper chord. Elon spoke about failure not as a setback but as a necessary step in innovation, a perspective Dorothy needed to embrace more fully in her own journey. For years, she had wrestled with the fear of failing, whether it was mastering new technology, reconnecting with her son, or leading a community resistant to change. But hearing Elon's candid reflections on his own stumbles, missed launches, financial struggles, and moments when others doubted him, reminded Dorothy that failure was not the end but a vital part of growth. Inspired, she reflected on her own story, the times she had tried and stumbled, the moments she had almost given up but chose to press forward. Elon's mindset became a kind of unexpected teacher, guiding her not just in technology but in resilience, vision, and daring to dream again. That afternoon, Dorothy reached out to Carlos, the young engineer she had met at the conference, eager to dive deeper into the world of innovation. Together, they brainstormed ways to make technology more accessible for seniors in their community, simple, intuitive apps that could bridge the gap between fear and curiosity. Carlos admired Dorothy's tenacity and perspective, seeing in her a reminder that innovation was as much about empathy as it was about engineering. Their collaboration became a powerful blend of experience and fresh ideas, proving that learning was truly a lifelong adventure. Meanwhile, Dorothy's community group grew stronger, embracing Elon's message of fearless experimentation. Members shared stories of trial and error, forgotten passwords, accidental deletions, awkward video calls, finding humor and encouragement in their shared struggles. Dorothy organized workshops themed "Fail Forward," where mistakes were celebrated as badges of progress. The atmosphere shifted from anxiety to excitement, as seniors found confidence in their capacity to adapt and thrive. One evening, as Dorothy prepared to speak at a regional summit on digital inclusion, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The young woman who once feared the internet had become a champion of change, a symbol of what was possible when courage met opportunity. In her speech, she quoted Elon Musk, "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." The audience responded with applause, many nodding in recognition of the universal struggle to overcome fear and doubt. Dorothy's words resonated beyond technology, they spoke to the heart of what it meant to grow older in a rapidly changing world. Later, as she returned home under a sky dotted with satellites silently circling Earth, Dorothy felt a profound connection to the vastness above and the intimate lives below. Elon's vision had started as a distant dream, but it had become a catalyst for transformation, fueling her own journey and inspiring a community to believe in possibility. She realized that the greatest lessons weren't just about technology or innovation but about embracing uncertainty, daring to try, and finding strength in vulnerability. The unexpected teacher in Elon Musk's story was not just the man himself but the mindset he embodied: relentless curiosity, fearless experimentation, and an unyielding belief in the power of human potential. And Dorothy, standing at the intersection of past and future, knew that these lessons would guide her and her community for years to come. Dorothy stood at the threshold of the community center, the familiar hum of conversations and laughter spilling through the open doors. Today was special, a gathering to celebrate the launch of the new digital storytelling project she had helped create, a space where seniors could share their histories, experiences, and dreams through video and writing, connecting generations in ways that had once seemed impossible. The room was alive with energy, a tapestry of faces, young and old, woven together by the shared desire to be seen, heard, and valued. Dorothy's heart swelled with pride as she watched Martha, a spry 78-year-old who had once feared the internet, guide a group of teenagers through editing a short film about local history. The project was more than a technological achievement, it was a reclamation of voice, a bridge spanning the gap between past and future. As she moved through the crowd, Dorothy felt the threads of connection tightening, pulling her further from the isolation that had once defined her days. She recalled the nights spent alone in the farmhouse, wrestling with doubt and loneliness, and marveled at how far she and her community had come. The satellite internet, once a distant dream, was now a lifeline, a conduit for stories, friendships, and healing. Dorothy took a moment to speak with James, a retired teacher who had become one of the project's most passionate contributors. "I never thought I'd be able to share my life this way," he said, eyes bright with emotion. "It's like I'm finally part of something bigger." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The project had ignited a fire not just in technology but in the human spirit, a reminder that connection was the heartbeat of community. That evening, Dorothy sat at her computer, reading messages from participants thanking her for creating a space where their voices mattered. She replied with warmth and encouragement, knowing that each message represented a story, a life, a piece of history preserved and honored. Her thoughts drifted to Elon Musk once more. His vision had been about satellites and technology, but Dorothy understood that at its core, it was about connection, the invisible threads linking people across distances and generations. She realized that technology was merely the tool, the true power was in the relationships it nurtured. Inspired, Dorothy began planning a virtual exchange program, connecting seniors in her town with peers from across the country. The idea was to foster dialogue, empathy, and friendship, proof that age and geography could no longer limit the human experience. As the weeks passed, the program blossomed. Video calls buzzed with laughter, shared memories, and new discoveries. Stories crossed oceans and borders, weaving a global community united by curiosity and compassion. Dorothy watched as participants found renewed purpose, learned new skills, and formed bonds that transcended time zones. Through these connections, they challenged stereotypes of aging as decline and isolation, instead embracing it as a time of growth, learning, and contribution. One afternoon, a young volunteer named Mia approached Dorothy, eyes shining with gratitude. "You've changed how I see aging," she said. "You've shown me that life doesn't have to slow down, it can change, yes, but it can still be full of meaning." Dorothy smiled, humbled and energized by the ripple effect of her work. She thought of the many faces she had encountered. Some skeptical, some fearful, all human, and how each had taken a step toward light in their own way. As she looked out the window, the satellites above traced their steady orbits, silent witnesses to the transformations below. Dorothy knew the journey was ongoing, filled with challenges and triumphs alike. But with each thread woven, each connection made, the tapestry grew stronger. The future, once uncertain and distant, was now a living, breathing reality shaped by courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief in the power of connection. And in that belief, Dorothy found hope, hope not just for herself, but for all those who had ever felt forgotten or too old to change. Just as Dorothy and her community were beginning to find their rhythm, an unexpected wave of resistance swept through the town. Not everyone embraced the changes brought by satellite internet and digital connection. Some clung to the familiar rhythms of the past, wary of the new technologies that seemed to disrupt their lives and traditions. It started with murmurs, whispers at the grocery store, skeptical questions at the church, and tense conversations at the town hall meetings. "Why do we need all this newfangled stuff?" one elderly man grumbled. "We've gotten by just fine without it all these years." A local business owner voiced concern about younger folks spending too much time online instead of focusing on real work. Dorothy felt the sting of these words, knowing that change was never easy and that fear often disguised itself as resistance. She understood these fears deeply, she had been there herself once, reluctant to step into the unknown. But now, armed with the experiences of progress and connection, she knew the importance of meeting resistance not with confrontation but with empathy and patience. Dorothy decided to hold an open forum at the community center, inviting everyone to come and share their concerns and hopes. The room was packed, the air thick with tension and unease. Voices rose and fell, some filled with doubt, others with frustration. Dorothy listened carefully, acknowledging the validity of their fears while gently reminding them of the opportunities at hand. "I know change is scary," she said. "But remember the times we faced challenges before, how we adapted and grew stronger. This is just another chapter in our story." She shared stories of neighbors who had found new joy and purpose through connection, of young people and elders learning together, of the doors that technology had opened. Slowly, the tone shifted. People began to ask questions, not to challenge but to understand. Dorothy and her team offered workshops, personalized help sessions, and ongoing support to ease the transition. The process was neither quick nor easy. There were setbacks, forgotten passwords, frustration with devices, and moments when old habits pulled hard. Yet with every small victory, the community grew more resilient. Dorothy's leadership shone brightest in these moments, her blend of honesty, compassion, and unwavering belief inspiring others to persevere. Elon Musk's words echoed in her mind, reminding her that progress was often met with resistance but that persistence and vision could overcome obstacles. As the weeks turned to months, a new sense of balance emerged. The town found ways to honor its traditions while embracing innovation. Local craftspeople began selling their goods online, connecting with customers beyond the town limits. Schools incorporated technology into lessons that enriched rather than replaced learning. Families used video calls to bridge distances and deepen relationships. Dorothy felt a quiet pride in the community's evolution, a testament to the power of listening, adapting, and staying true to shared values. One chilly evening, as she walked home under a sky streaked with stars and satellites, Dorothy reflected on the storm they had weathered. Resistance was part of the journey, a reminder that meaningful change required courage not just from leaders but from everyone willing to step into the future. She realized that transformation was messy and nonlinear but deeply human, filled with doubt and hope, fear and courage, endings and beginnings. In the heart of the storm, Dorothy found calm, a steadfast commitment to the belief that connection, learning, and growth were possible at any age. And as the satellites continued their silent orbit above, she knew the journey was far from over but that the path forward was illuminated by the shared strength of a community willing to change together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The community center was alive with excitement as Dorothy unveiled her newest project. A plan to extend satellite internet access beyond their town, reaching neighboring rural communities that had long been disconnected from the digital world. This wasn't just about technology, it was about spreading opportunity, hope, and connection to those who, like Dorothy once did, felt forgotten by time and progress. The idea had sparked from countless conversations with neighbors and friends who shared stories of isolation and longing. Dorothy knew the power of connection firsthand, and she believed it was a gift that could, and should, be shared widely. With renewed energy, she began reaching out to regional leaders, nonprofit organizations, and technology partners, weaving a network of support and collaboration. The path ahead was daunting, filled with logistical challenges, funding hurdles, and the skepticism of those wary of change. Yet Dorothy's determination was fueled by the vision of a connected community. A place where age, geography, and circumstance no longer limited possibility. Drawing on Elon Musk's example of audacity and innovation, she embraced bold thinking and relentless persistence. She and Carlos, her young engineer ally, worked tirelessly to design workshops, secure equipment, and coordinate volunteers. Every phone call, every meeting, every email was a step closer to the dream. Along the way, Dorothy encountered familiar obstacles, outdated infrastructure, limited budgets, and bureaucratic red tape. But she learned to navigate these challenges with patience and creativity, rallying support by sharing stories of transformation and the tangible impact satellite internet had already made in her town. The project became a community effort, with residents volunteering time, skills, and resources. Local businesses donated space and equipment, schools offered classrooms for training sessions, and seniors mentored newcomers with kindness and encouragement. The growing momentum was contagious, a ripple effect spreading outward. One crisp morning, Dorothy stood at the edge of a neighboring town, watching as technicians installed satellite receivers on rooftops. Children peered curiously from windows, while parents gathered in groups, hopeful and anxious about what this new connection might bring. For many, the arrival of the internet symbolized more than just technology, it was a bridge to education, healthcare, family, and dreams long deferred. Dorothy felt a swell of emotion, knowing that the journey that had begun with her own struggle to adapt had blossomed into a mission touching countless lives. The work was far from over, but the vision was clear. To create a network of connected communities, united by shared resources and shared hope. In quiet moments, Dorothy thought back to Elon Musk's words about thinking big and embracing failure as part of success. She realized that the true essence of his vision wasn't just in launching rockets or satellites, but in inspiring people to believe in the power of possibility. That belief had transformed her life, and now it was transforming others. As the sun set, casting golden light over the rolling hills and satellite dishes, Dorothy felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The dream was expanding, not just outward to new places but inward, touching hearts and minds with the promise of connection, growth, and new beginnings. In this moment, she understood a profound truth: the future was not a distant horizon but a journey of courage, community, and unwavering hope. And in that journey, anyone, at any age, could find their place, their voice, and their power to change the world. Dorothy had never imagined that reconnecting with her estranged son, Michael, would become one of the most transformative parts of her journey. For years, silence and regret had filled the space between them, a gulf widened by distance, misunderstandings, and the slow drift that time often brings. But as the satellite internet brought new possibilities into Dorothy's life, it also opened a door she had long thought closed. It began with a tentative message sent through a video call platform, a simple, "Hello, Michael, it's Mom," spoken with a voice trembling with hope and vulnerability. The first call was awkward, filled with pauses and unspoken feelings. Michael's face, worn by years of his own struggles, held surprise and cautious curiosity. Yet, beneath the uncertainty, there was a flicker of something both had missed for too long: connection. Inspired by Elon Musk's example of taking risks and embracing change, Dorothy decided to approach this fragile bridge with honesty and patience, understanding that healing would take time. Over the following weeks, they began to share stories, memories, and updates about their lives. Michael, who had once been distant and skeptical, started opening up about his challenges, divorce, career setbacks, and loneliness. Dorothy shared her own fears and regrets, breaking down walls built by years of silence. The satellite internet, once a tool for information and entertainment, became a lifeline for rebuilding family ties. Dorothy felt a profound shift inside her, a mix of relief, joy, and cautious optimism. The past was not erased, but it no longer defined their future. Through video calls, they revisited old family photos, laughed at shared memories, and made plans to meet in person. The emotional weight of years lifted slightly with each conversation, replaced by a growing sense of hope and possibility. Dorothy also reached out to her daughter, Emma, who had distanced herself during difficult times. Their reconnection was different, marked by forgiveness, understanding, and a shared commitment to rebuild trust. Emma, now a young adult navigating her own path, admired her mother's courage and transformation. Their renewed relationship became a source of strength for both, reminding Dorothy that family could evolve and heal even in the face of hardship. Meanwhile, Michael's involvement in the community project grew. He volunteered to teach technology workshops, using his own experiences to encourage others who felt overwhelmed by change. His journey mirrored his mother's, a testament to the power of connection and second chances. The community noticed the change in Dorothy too, a woman once burdened by loneliness now surrounded by love and purpose. Her story became a symbol of redemption and the enduring power of family bonds. One afternoon, as Dorothy and Michael sat together watching a documentary about Elon Musk's latest space mission, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Musk's vision had sparked a journey that transcended technology, touching hearts and healing wounds. The satellites above were more than machines, they were bridges linking not just places, but people. Dorothy realized that her new legacy was not only about expanding connectivity but about rekindling relationships, mending broken bridges, and embracing the messy, beautiful complexity of family. And in that realization, she found a strength and peace that no technology alone could provide. As she looked toward the future, Dorothy knew that the work of connection, whether through satellites or heart, was ongoing. But she was no longer afraid. With each call, each conversation, and each moment of vulnerability, she was building a new chapter, one filled with hope, love, and the enduring power of second chances. The morning air was crisp as Dorothy sipped her coffee on the porch, watching the sun rise over the rolling hills that had been her lifelong home. The once quiet town now buzzed with the energy of progress, a transformation fueled by the satellite internet project and the community's shared commitment to connection. But Dorothy knew the true power of their work was beginning to ripple far beyond their borders. Through the networks she had helped build, stories of hope, resilience, and reinvention traveled across states and communities, inspiring others to embrace change and seek connection. Dorothy's story, shared on social media and local news, became a beacon for seniors everywhere who felt left behind by the rapid pace of technological advancement. Messages poured in, from small towns in the Midwest to coastal villages, each sharing similar struggles and dreams. Some asked for advice, others sought encouragement, and many simply wanted to share their own journeys of rediscovery. Dorothy found herself part of a larger movement, a growing chorus of voices challenging the narrative that aging meant decline and disconnection. At a national conference on digital inclusion, Dorothy took the stage to speak about the transformative power of satellite internet and the human connections it enabled. Her voice, steady and passionate, carried the weight of lived experience and the fire of a newfound purpose. She spoke not just of technology but of courage, the courage to embrace uncertainty, to build bridges where walls once stood, and to believe in the possibility of change at any age. Among the audience were policymakers, technologists, educators, and fellow seniors, all united by a common goal, to ensure no one was left behind in the digital age. Dorothy's message resonated deeply, sparking conversations, collaborations, and new initiatives aimed at expanding access and fostering community. Back home, the impact of the project manifested in tangible ways. Local businesses thrived as they reached new customers online, schools incorporated digital literacy into their curricula, empowering students and elders alike. Healthcare providers began offering telemedicine services, improving access for those with limited mobility. Dorothy watched as her neighbors discovered new passions, whether it was photography shared on social platforms, online book clubs, or virtual travel groups that opened windows to the world beyond their town. Each success story added fuel to the fire of possibility. Inspired by Elon Musk's vision of connecting the world through satellite technology, Dorothy saw that their efforts were part of something much larger, a global network of people and ideas linked by innovation and hope. The satellites orbiting overhead were symbols of human ingenuity but also of shared humanity, reminding her that technology's true purpose was to bring people closer, not farther apart. One evening, as Dorothy prepared for bed, she read an email from a woman in a remote Alaskan village, thanking her for the inspiration to advocate for better connectivity in her community. The message was a powerful reminder that even the smallest actions could spark change in the most unexpected places. Dorothy felt a surge of gratitude and responsibility, knowing that their journey was part of an ongoing ripple effect, spreading across miles and lives. She reflected on the transformation, not just of technology or infrastructure but of hearts and minds. The journey had begun with a simple choice to embrace change, and it had grown into a movement that transcended age, geography, and circumstance. In that moment, Dorothy understood that legacy wasn't just about what one built but about the lives touched and the hope ignited. The ripple effect was far from over. As satellites continued their silent orbits, carrying data and dreams across the globe, Dorothy felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The future was connected, not just by wires or waves but by the shared courage of people willing to reach out, learn, and grow together. And in that connection, she knew, lay the true power to change the world. The soft glow of dawn seeped through the curtains as Dorothy sat quietly in her living room, surrounded by photographs that traced the arc of her life. Each image told a story, youth filled with hope, middle years marked by struggle, and now a season of rediscovery and growth. She sipped her tea, reflecting on the extraordinary journey she had undertaken, one sparked by the faintest glimmer of possibility from a man she barely knew, a visionary named Elon Musk. His relentless drive to break boundaries, to challenge the status quo, had resonated deeply with her own quiet rebellion against the limitations she once accepted. Dorothy knew that embracing the future wasn't about denying age or clinging to the past but about having the courage to keep going, to keep learning, and to keep connecting. The satellite internet had done more than bring faster connections, it had brought new life to a community, a family, and to Dorothy herself. Yet the future still held uncertainties. Questions about health, purpose, and meaning that lingered in the corners of her mind. She understood that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the willingness to move forward despite it. As she prepared for a community gathering to celebrate the project's milestones, Dorothy thought about the faces she would see, friends who had grown from isolation to engagement, skeptics turned believers, and young people eager to carry the vision forward. The event was more than a celebration, it was a testament to resilience and shared hope. At the gathering, Dorothy stood before the crowd, her voice steady but filled with emotion. She spoke of the journey, not just her own but the collective experience of a community that refused to be left behind. She shared stories of challenge and triumph, of the storms weathered and the bonds forged. Her words echoed the ethos of Elon Musk, to dream boldly, to embrace failure as a teacher, and to relentlessly pursue the possible. After the speeches, the room buzzed with conversations about next steps, new projects, expanded training programs, and plans to reach even more remote areas. Dorothy listened with pride and humility, knowing the journey was far from over. That night, as the event wound down, she found herself alone on the porch, looking up at the stars and the satellites silently crossing the sky. She felt a profound connection to something greater, a network not just of technology but of human spirit and possibility. The future was vast and unknown, but she was ready. Ready to face whatever came next with grace and grit, fueled by the lessons of her journey. Dorothy's thoughts turned inward, embracing a quiet resolve. Aging might bring challenges, but it also offered wisdom, perspective, and the chance to rewrite the narrative. She realized she was not defined by years or limitations but by her willingness to dream, to adapt, and to connect. Elon Musk's vision had been a spark, but the flame belonged to all who dared to believe in new beginnings. And as Dorothy turned in for the night, she carried with her a simple but powerful truth: the courage to keep going was the greatest gift of all. The town's library had become a vibrant hub, its shelves no longer silent but filled with the hum of conversations, the tapping of keyboards, and the bright laughter of new friendships forming. Dorothy had helped transform the once quiet space into a place where technology met humanity. A place where connection was about more than just the internet, it was about belonging. She often thought about Elon Musk's words: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." The importance of connection was now palpable in the very air of the library, a testament to how technology could become a bridge rather than a barrier. People of all ages gathered there, seniors learning how to video chat with distant family, teenagers collaborating on projects, parents discovering online resources to help their children. The satellite internet had brought the world to their doorstep, but the real magic was in the relationships it nurtured. Dorothy watched as her neighbors embraced new opportunities. Some enrolled in online classes, others started small businesses, and many simply reached out to old friends or new acquaintances. The digital world had become a canvas for human stories, dreams, and healing. For Dorothy, the library symbolized a new chapter, a place where the past and future met. She remembered how, just a few years ago, the same space had felt cold and isolating. Now it thrived with warmth, possibility, and shared purpose. The shift wasn't just about technology, it was about rediscovering community in a changing world. One afternoon, Dorothy met with a group of seniors eager to start a podcast, sharing stories from their lives, histories of the town, and lessons learned. The project was both a creative outlet and a way to preserve memories for future generations. Listening to their voices, Dorothy felt the profound power of connection, not just through satellites or screens but through shared experiences and empathy. She also saw a younger generation stepping up as teachers and friends, bridging the gap between old and new, blending tradition with innovation. The generational exchange enriched everyone involved, creating bonds that defied age. Outside the library, the town square had become a gathering place for events streamed live to communities miles away. Local musicians performed for virtual audiences, town meetings included remote participation, celebrations were shared across time zones. The satellite network was no longer just a utility, it was the heartbeat of a connected, caring community. Dorothy's own journey mirrored this transformation. From feeling isolated and forgotten, she had grown into a leader, a mentor, and a symbol of resilience. Her life was proof that connection was a lifeline and a source of endless possibility. One evening, as she sat by her window watching the satellites trace arcs of light across the sky, Dorothy felt a deep sense of gratitude. Technology had been the spark, but connection was the fire that warmed their hearts. She thought of Elon Musk, not as a distant figure of innovation but as a reminder that bold ideas, when paired with human courage and compassion, could change lives. In the quiet of the night, Dorothy understood that the greatest legacy was not the satellites or the signals but the bonds forged, the fears overcome, and the hope shared. Connection was more than technology, it was the essence of humanity, timeless and boundless. The quiet of the evening was pierced by the sharp ring of Dorothy's phone. It was Carlos, her trusted engineer and partner in the satellite project. The news wasn't good. A severe storm was forecasted to hit the region in the next 48 hours, threatening the fragile infrastructure they had worked so hard to build. The satellites themselves were safe in orbit, but the ground stations, relay towers, and community equipment were vulnerable. Dorothy felt a familiar surge of anxiety, a fear that threatened to undo months of progress. But deep down, she knew this was just another challenge in a long journey. Elon Musk had often spoken about the importance of embracing failure as part of innovation, about the necessity of pushing forward despite setbacks. Dorothy reminded herself that courage wasn't the absence of fear but the will to act anyway. Over the next day, she coordinated with community volunteers and local officials to prepare for the storm. Sandbags were laid, equipment was secured, and emergency plans were reviewed. The entire town came together, united by a shared determination to protect the lifeline they had created. As the storm clouds gathered and the wind began to howl, Dorothy stood firm, drawing strength from the community's resilience and the journey that had brought them here. The night was long and fraught with tension. Power flickered, rain battered the windows, and the howling wind threatened to tear through the town. Yet the satellite system, shielded by the community's efforts, held strong. When dawn finally broke, the damage was less severe than feared. Some roads were blocked, and a few towers needed repair, but the connection remained intact, a lifeline for emergency services, communication, and hope. Dorothy felt a wave of relief and gratitude. The storm had tested them, but it hadn't broken their spirit. Instead, it had forged a deeper bond among neighbors and strengthened their resolve. In the days that followed, repairs were made quickly, and the community rallied to restore full service. Dorothy worked alongside volunteers, her hands steady and determined despite the fatigue. She knew that resilience was about more than infrastructure, it was about people, hope, and the refusal to give up. The storm became a defining moment, a reminder that progress was never a straight path, but a series of rises and falls. Dorothy reflected on Elon Musk's mindset, the fearless persistence that turned setbacks into stepping stones. She saw that same spirit in herself and her community, a testament to the power of courage and connection. As the town healed, new ideas blossomed. Plans were made to strengthen infrastructure, diversify energy sources, and build even more robust systems. Dorothy realized that facing fear head-on was part of growth, and every challenge was an opportunity to learn and improve. One afternoon, standing on a hill overlooking the town, Dorothy watched the satellites silently orbiting above, symbols of human ingenuity and hope. She thought of all who had come together to build, protect, and nurture this network. The journey had been long, filled with moments of doubt and triumph, but it was far from over. Dorothy felt a quiet pride, not just in what they had accomplished but in the strength they had discovered within themselves. The last challenge was never the end but a doorway to new beginnings. And with that understanding, she stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next with open heart and unwavering courage. The sun rose gently over the small town, casting a warm golden glow on rooftops, trees, and the satellite dishes that now dotted the landscape like quiet sentinels. Dorothy stood on her porch, her eyes reflecting the light of a new day, a day that felt less like an ending and more like a fresh beginning. Years ago, she had thought her best days were behind her, that aging meant fading into the background, forgotten and irrelevant. But the journey she had embarked on, sparked by a chance encounter with Elon Musk's vision and powered by courage and community, had rewritten her story. Her life was now a testament to the truth she carried deep within: I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again. The satellite internet project had blossomed into something far greater than technology. It was a movement, a revival of hope, connection, and purpose for people who had long felt left behind. Dorothy's role evolved from a lone dreamer to a leader, mentor, and symbol of transformation. The town thrived, connected not just by signals but by shared dreams and resilient hearts. On this morning, Dorothy received a message from Michael, her son, who had come to visit after years of distance. They planned to meet at the community center, a place that had witnessed so much healing and growth. As she prepared, Dorothy reflected on the long path that had brought them here, the regrets, the fears, the risks taken, and the bonds rebuilt. She felt a deep gratitude for the journey and the lessons it had taught her. When Michael arrived, the embrace was warm and unguarded, filled with years of missed moments and newfound hope. They talked for hours about the future, about dreams and plans, about the power of connection that had healed wounds and opened doors. Their reunion was a symbol of the new legacy Dorothy was building, one rooted in courage, forgiveness, and the relentless belief that it is never too late to change. Later that day, the community gathered for a celebration. Stories were shared, laughter echoed, and the satellites above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if acknowledging the journey below. Dorothy stood before the crowd, her heart full, and spoke with quiet strength. This isn't just a story about technology. It's about people, about rediscovering hope, embracing change, and knowing that we matter. No matter our age, our past, or where we come from, we all have the power to create new beginnings. Her words resonated deeply, touching the hearts of everyone present. As the celebration continued, Dorothy looked around at faces young and old, each carrying their own stories of transformation. She realized that the true legacy wasn't a monument or a system but the lives changed, the connections made, and the hope rekindled. Elon Musk's vision had been the spark, but the fire was theirs to keep burning. That night, as Dorothy sat by her window watching the stars and satellites glide across the sky, she felt a profound peace. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth every moment, the doubts, the struggles, the breakthroughs. She knew that the future was still unwritten, full of challenges and possibilities, but she was ready to meet it head-on. The story of her life had changed, and in doing so, she had changed the story for others. Aging was no longer a fading light but a steady flame, one that could ignite passion, purpose, and connection at any stage. Dorothy smiled softly, whispering a quiet thank you to the stars, to Elon Musk's bold vision, and to the community that had become her family. The new legacy was clear: it was a beginning, not an end, a call to all who feel forgotten to stand, to connect, and to matter once more. It had been 6 months since the celebration that marked the official handoff of the satellite internet project to the town's next generation of leaders. Dorothy, now affectionately called the Signal Lady by local schoolchildren, had taken a step back from the daily logistics. But stepping back didn't mean stepping away. If anything, her presence had deepened, becoming something less visible but more rooted, a kind of spiritual anchor for a community that had learned to believe in the impossible. People still came to her porch for advice. Strangers still sent letters thanking her for helping them feel seen. And each morning, she still took her tea out to the same spot, watching the skies where those silver satellites drifted quietly overhead, invisible to the eye but undeniable in their impact. One afternoon, Dorothy received an invitation. It wasn't a town hall notice or a neighbor's request, it was from a national nonprofit focused on rural innovation. They wanted her to speak at their annual summit in Austin, Texas. A keynote speaker. Her name on the banner. When she read the email, Dorothy laughed out loud, shaking her head. Her. At a tech summit? She had once struggled to log into her own email. But the longer she sat with it, the more it made sense. Not because she was a tech genius, but because she was living proof that transformation was possible, even late in life. Not just transformation of skill or circumstance, but of identity, of meaning. She accepted. The weeks leading up to the summit flew by. Carlos helped her prepare a short presentation, but more than that, he encouraged her to just speak from the heart. You don't need slides to move people, Dorothy, he told her with a grin. You've got something better, the truth. When the day came, Dorothy stepped onto a sleek stage in front of hundreds of attendees, young entrepreneurs, rural advocates, and digital visionaries. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. My name is Dorothy Reynolds, she began. And I used to believe I was too old to change. Too old to matter. Too far behind to ever catch up. She paused, letting the silence wrap around her like a warm coat. But I was wrong. Over the next 20 minutes, she told her story, not with big data charts or buzzwords, but with vivid moments, the first time she logged onto the internet. The fear she felt. The night she reconnected with her son. The way the town had come alive, one connection at a time. She spoke of Elon Musk, not as a celebrity, but as a symbol. He reminded me that it's okay to think differently, she said. To be unreasonable. To aim for something bigger than yourself, even if people laugh at you. By the time she finished, there were tears in the room. Standing ovation. Reporters requested interviews. Someone from a foundation offered to fund an expansion of her work. But what meant the most to Dorothy was the quiet line that formed after her talk. People, young and old, waiting to shake her hand, to thank her, to share their own stories of doubt and awakening. That night, alone in her hotel room, Dorothy stared out at the city lights and felt something stir in her. The journey she had thought was ending was actually evolving. This wasn't about internet anymore. This was about possibility itself. The next morning, she called Carlos. "I think we need to build something bigger," she said. "Not just for our town. For everyone." And just like that, a new chapter began. Dorothy, Carlos, and a small team of volunteers began forming what they would call the Second Signal Project, a national mentorship initiative connecting seniors in rural towns with youth in cities. Using the same satellite infrastructure, they'd host weekly video circles, pairing people across generations, across zip codes, across lives. A retired Navy mechanic in Nebraska might teach a coding student in New York about discipline and grit. A high school senior in Arizona could teach a grandmother in Kentucky how to build an Etsy store. The goal wasn't just knowledge sharing, it was identity shifting. Every person, regardless of age, would be both teacher and student. The program caught on quickly. Local newspapers picked it up. A documentary filmmaker started following their work. Dorothy, never one to seek the spotlight, was suddenly a face on magazine covers, always smiling gently, always wearing her signature blue cardigan. But she never forgot why she started. One rainy evening, months later, she visited the local nursing home. A new resident named Marvin had arrived recently, a former engineer who'd lost his wife the year before and hadn't spoken much since. Dorothy sat beside him with a tablet and gently nudged it into his hands. "Would you like to meet someone who thinks engineers are superheroes?" she asked. On the other end of the screen was a 10-year-old named Lily from Kansas, obsessed with space and rockets. Marvin's eyes lit up. He started talking about thrust, about escape velocity, about the way metal sings when it's under strain. For the first time in months, he smiled. It was in that moment, quiet, ordinary, profound, that Dorothy saw the future she had helped build. Not a world of gadgets and screens, but of bridges, between generations, between strangers, between past and future. A world where no one was too old to grow, and no one was too young to lead. Back home, as the wind picked up outside and the sky darkened with the oncoming evening, Dorothy wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the porch. The stars blinked above. Somewhere in the blackness, satellites moved silently, invisible threads tying lives together. She thought of Elon Musk, of his rockets and risks. She smiled, whispering into the night, "We did it. In our own way, we reached space too." She wasn't chasing legacy anymore. She was living it, one connection at a time. And though the road ahead would bring new storms, Dorothy knew she wouldn't walk it alone. Because the signal was strong now, and it was spreading. Not just through the air, but through the hearts of everyone who had ever wondered if their time had passed. It hadn't. It was just beginning. The small town had changed. Not in a flashy way, there were no skyscrapers, no big tech campuses, but something in the air had shifted. It was in the way neighbors waved a little longer, in how the young listened more closely to the old, and how the old carried themselves a little taller. It was in the laughter coming from the library's new media room, in the steady stream of virtual workshops hosted from once empty homes, and in the quiet hum of routers working late into the night. It was a town reborn, connected, not just digitally, but emotionally. Dorothy knew she had played a part in it. And that part, while deeply fulfilling, was coming to an end. Not an end like a closing door, but like a sunrise handing over the sky to the morning light. She had been up early, watching the sun peek over the horizon from her porch. It reminded her of the first morning she tried to turn on a laptop. How her fingers had fumbled. How her heart had raced. How the glow of the screen had seemed like a foreign language. And now? Now it was second nature. But more than that, she had helped make it second nature for others, too. She'd built something that would outlive her. And now it was time to pass the torch. The town had organized a small ceremony in her honor. Dorothy had hesitated at first, never one for big gestures, but the mayor insisted. "This isn't just about you," he said with a grin. "It's about everyone you lit a fire under." So, she agreed. Not for vanity, but because she understood the power of storytelling, of making moments matter. People needed closure. They needed inspiration. They needed to see what was possible. The community center was packed that evening. Families, seniors, students, volunteers, people from the town and beyond. Several had driven from other states just to be there. The mayor stood first, giving a short speech about courage, transformation, and community. Then Carlos stepped up and spoke with his usual mixture of awe and affection. "She taught us that even when you're not the loudest person in the room, you can still lead. You can still change everything." Finally, Dorothy rose from her seat. The crowd hushed. She stepped up to the podium without notes, her fingers gently gripping the edge, not from nerves but from the weight of what this moment meant. "I used to think the sky was something you only looked up at," she began, her voice calm and sure. "Something that belonged to dreamers, inventors, people far smarter or braver than me. But I was wrong. The sky belongs to everyone. Every single one of us." She let the word settle. "When I started this journey, I didn't know how to use a mouse, let alone bring internet to a whole community. But one night, sitting alone in my kitchen, I heard a voice on a podcast, Elon Musk. He said something I'll never forget: some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. That hit me. Because I realized I was the one waiting for someone to change things. I didn't realize I could be that someone." The room was still. Dorothy smiled. "This isn't a story about me. This is a story about all of us. About what happens when we stop believing our best years are behind us. About what happens when we stop waiting for permission to matter." She paused again, then nodded toward a group of high schoolers in the front row, the next generation of town leaders. "I'm passing this torch to you now. Not because I'm done, but because I believe in you. I believe in what you'll build, in the connections you'll make, and the fires you'll light." As the audience rose in applause, Dorothy stepped back, her heart full. Not of pride, but of peace. That night, she sat once again on her porch. The stars twinkled above, and she could almost feel the satellites arcing across the sky, silent messengers of change, possibility, and dreams come true. Suddenly, the screen door creaked open behind her. It was Emma, her daughter, visiting from Oregon, wrapped in a blanket, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to Dorothy and sat beside her. "I'm proud of you," Emma said softly. Dorothy chuckled. "I'm still figuring it out." Emma smiled. "We all are. But you're the reason I'm even trying." They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, the porch light casting a soft circle around them. "Mom," Emma said, after a while. "What made you keep going? When it was hard? When no one believed?" Dorothy thought for a moment, then looked up at the stars. "I guess I realized I didn't have to change the whole world," she said. "I just had to change my corner of it. And sometimes, that's enough to spark something bigger." Emma leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "It's more than enough." The next morning, Dorothy got a call from a teacher in Arizona. One of their students had watched her keynote speech online and wanted to start a satellite-powered mentorship club at their school. Dorothy agreed instantly. Later that week, she was interviewed on a podcast called Trailblazers After 60, where she told her story to thousands of listeners, retirees, widows, grandparents, many of whom wrote in saying, "If she can do it, maybe I can too." Her inbox filled with invitations, to write a book, to consult on rural innovation, to speak at aging summits. She took some. She passed others on to local leaders like Carlos or Emma. Because now it wasn't just about her. It never had been. Dorothy had become the spark, but the fire was spreading, lighting hearts and towns and conversations all across the country. And through it all, she never stopped learning. She took an online course in environmental tech. She launched a small blog called Porch Signals, where she wrote weekly reflections on purpose, change, and staying curious. It wasn't flashy, but it connected with people. One of her most shared posts was titled, "You're Not Done Yet." It read, "There is no deadline on purpose. You're not behind. You're not irrelevant. You're not done. I used to think I was waiting for something, more time, a sign, someone else's approval. What I was really waiting for was myself. The part of me brave enough to say, why not now?" If you're reading this, maybe you're waiting too. Let me be the voice that tells you. It's your turn. Light the signal. We're listening. Thousands of people subscribed. Messages poured in. And somewhere, in a SpaceX office thousands of miles away, someone forwarded it to Elon Musk himself with the subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." He did. He read it quietly, then smiled. No reply. No retweet. Just a quiet acknowledgement that his vision had reached further than he'd ever imagined, not through headlines or stock prices, but through the life of a woman who proved that a signal could change everything. Even a life. Even a town. Even the world. 2 years had passed since Dorothy stood on that stage in Austin and told the world that the sky belonged to everyone. In that time, her story had done what she never expected, it grew wings. Not viral in a flash-in-the-pan kind of way, but steady, rooted, like a tree quietly growing taller each season. Word spread not through headlines, but through hearts. Through people sitting in their kitchens at midnight, wondering if they, too, were too old to begin again. And finding in Dorothy's journey an answer. The Second Signal project had expanded beyond their small town, with chapters now operating in 38 states. What started as a satellite internet mentorship model had evolved into something deeper, a nationwide framework for generational exchange. Each program looked a little different. In Ohio, retirees taught veterans how to navigate VA systems using broadband. In New Mexico, teenagers taught elders how to create photo memoirs, using tablets and video editing tools. In Maine, fishermen live-streamed local history to kids in urban classrooms. The core remained the same, connection. Real, human, heart-level connection. At the center of this growing constellation sat Dorothy, not controlling it, not managing it, but orbiting as a quiet symbol. Her blog, Porch Signals, had surpassed 100,000 subscribers. It was now part story hub, part community board, and part movement. Each week, a different elder from across the country would guest write, sharing how they broke through their fears, learned something new, or helped light someone else's spark. The theme of the month was, Pass It On. One story came from a man named Leroy in Mississippi, 82 years old, who had built a weather station in his backyard and now live-streamed forecasts to local schools. "I thought I was just puttering," he wrote, "but then a 9-year-old girl emailed me and said I was the reason she wanted to become a meteorologist. So I guess this old fool still got a little lightning left." Another came from Ellen in Montana, a widow who had been silent for years until she joined a virtual quilting circle. "I hadn't spoken to anyone outside my church in almost a decade," she wrote. "Now my quilt is part of an exhibition traveling to 5 cities, and more importantly, I found my voice again." Dorothy read every submission, sometimes with tears, sometimes with laughter, always with awe. These weren't just stories. They were proof. Proof that courage didn't retire. That legacy wasn't something you left behind, it was something you lived, day by day, decision by decision. One late autumn afternoon, she received a letter in the mail, not an email, but an actual letter, handwritten in blue ink. The return address said, Hawthorne Correctional Facility. Inside, it read, Dear Mrs. Reynolds. My name is Jerome. I'm 64. I've been incarcerated for most of my life. 2 months ago, our facility started a pilot mentorship circle using your second signal program. We talk every Wednesday, me and a kid from Tulsa who wants to be an engineer. I've never felt useful before. Not really. But last week, he told me that he's staying in school because of me. That he believes in himself now. I didn't know how to answer. But then I remembered your words, you're not done yet. Thank you. For helping me matter. Dorothy pressed the letter to her heart and closed her eyes. The signal had reached places no satellite could touch, prisons, lonely hearts, forgotten corners of America. She wasn't just watching change happen. She was watching awakening. And yet, she remained the same Dorothy. She still kept her porch light on. Still had the same chipped mug for tea. Still waved at the mailman like clockwork. But inside, something vast had shifted. She no longer saw herself as just an old woman in a small town. She was a node on a network of transformation. She didn't need to be famous. She only needed to be faithful. One snowy evening in December, she was invited to appear virtually at a high school assembly in Chicago. The auditorium was packed. Students held up signs that read, "Dorothy changed everything" and "The sky belongs to me too." She chuckled. "You kids give me too much credit," she told them. "All I did was try. You can do that too. Try when you're scared. Try when you're tired. Try when no one claps. The trying is what wakes you up." A young girl raised her hand and asked, "What do we do when people tell us it's too late?" Dorothy leaned forward, eyes soft but fierce. "You look them in the eye and say, too late for what? Dreams don't have expiration dates. Neither do second chances." That line would be quoted, printed, and shared across social media. But more importantly, it would be remembered. By young people who felt unseen and older ones who thought they were finished. It became a quiet mantra. A permission slip. Too late for what? Spring arrived slowly that year, and with it came an invitation Dorothy had never imagined, to attend the White House's National Innovation Forum. Her name had been nominated by a coalition of educators and technologists as one of the top 10 community innovators of the decade. She almost said no. But Carlos convinced her. "Dorothy, this isn't about awards. It's about showing people like you, like us, that we still belong in the room. Even if it's the White House." So she went. She wore a navy blue dress with a sunflower pin. The ceremony was quiet, elegant. She shook hands with senators and CEOs. But her favorite moment came in a small breakout session, where she sat beside a 28-year-old tech founder from Detroit. "You're the Dorothy?" he asked, eyes wide. "My grandma has your quote framed in her sewing room. She made me read every blog post of yours before I got my first investor." Dorothy laughed. "Well, tell your grandma she raised a smart one." He grinned. "She says you gave her her voice back." Dorothy didn't answer right away. She just smiled, holding that truth close. When she returned home, the porch was filled with flowers and cards. Not out of celebration, but solidarity. She had become more than a leader. She was living proof that one person's decision to try anyway could become a lighthouse for thousands. One evening, Emma visited again, now running her own satellite co-op in Oregon, inspired directly by her mother's legacy. "I've been thinking," Emma said, sitting beside her on the porch. "What if we launched a national summit? An annual gathering for Second Signal members, speakers, tech folks, artists, all generations. We'd call it Signal Forward. You'd open it. Maybe Elon would even show up." Dorothy chuckled. "He's a little busy shooting rockets into space, I think." Emma grinned. "But you taught him something. You showed the world what his vision feels like on the ground." The way satellites aren't just data, they're dignity. Dorothy nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Let's go forward. That summer, 3,000 people gathered in Denver for the first ever Signal Forward Summit. They wore shirts that read, "Not too old. Not too late. Not done yet." They came with stories, with scars, with ideas. The summit was a melting pot of hope. Dorothy gave the opening talk, broadcast live to more than 1 million people. "We started with signals in the sky," she said. "Now we are the signal." The audience rose to their feet. And somewhere, whether on a porch in Kentucky, a prison in Arkansas, a startup in Brooklyn, or a classroom in Montana, someone watched and felt the flicker of something inside. A new signal. Theirs. The room smelled faintly of chalk dust and old books. It was a small classroom in rural Iowa, where the windows rattled when trains passed and the Wi-Fi signal was held together by little more than hope and duct tape. But inside, something electric was happening. At the front of the class, a 16-year-old girl named June stood with a laptop in one hand and a homemade poster in the other. On it were 3 words, hand-drawn in black marker, "Someone like me." She cleared her throat. "This project started because I didn't see anyone like me doing anything that felt big. I live in a small town. I help my grandma with her pills and my little brother with his homework. My internet is slow, and I used to think my dreams had to be small to fit where I lived. But then I heard about Dorothy Reynolds." The screen behind her blinked to life. A photo of Dorothy, smiling from her porch, her now famous blue cardigan draped over her shoulders, filled the projector screen. Her quote was underneath, "You're not done yet. I read every blog post. Every entry," June said, her voice steadier now. "And I realized something. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. She didn't go viral overnight. She just tried. And that trying lit a fire. I wanted to see if I could do the same." June clicked to the next slide. It showed a map, tiny green dots clustered across the Midwest. Each dot is a house in a rural area where an elder is now connected to the internet for the first time because of our project. Me and a few friends raised money, installed satellite kits, and trained people in how to use email, video calls, and search. It's called Someone Like Me, because we believe the next Dorothy is out there. Maybe she's lonely. Maybe she's scared. But maybe she just needs a signal. Applause filled the room. What June didn't know yet, what she couldn't have known, was that her presentation would be shared across dozens of education networks within the week. That a nonprofit in Oregon would reach out to fund her work. That someone would forward the clip to the Second Signal Alliance, and that within 10 days, she'd be invited to speak at Signal Forward 2.0. Dorothy saw the clip from her home in Kentucky. She had just come in from the garden, a little dirt under her nails, her knees sore but her spirit sharp as ever. She watched June's trembling hands and clear eyes on her old tablet and smiled. "There she is," she whispered to no one in particular. The next spark. The invitation for Signal Forward 2.0 had already been sitting on her table for weeks. She'd planned to skip it this time, figured she'd made her speech, handed things off, and that her time in the spotlight had come and gone. But watching June stirred something she hadn't expected. It wasn't vanity. It was duty. Because the spark might live in someone else now, but the ember still burned in her. And embers had their own kind of strength. She sent a simple reply, "I'll be there." By the time June landed in Denver for the summit, she was already being called the new Dorothy. It embarrassed her. She didn't want to be famous. She wanted to build something that mattered. Something that lasted. The conference center was massive, walls covered in light displays and generational quotes. Whole rooms buzzing with intergenerational panels, invention showcases, and roundtable mentorships. Drones flew overhead capturing footage. Elder mentors in their 70s sat beside teen coders. Everyone wore the same lanyard, "Signal is action." When June was escorted backstage for her panel, she was surprised to find a small green room, and in it, Dorothy herself. "Oh my gosh," June said, almost tripping over her feet. "You're here." Dorothy chuckled and stood slowly. "And you're the girl who reminded me I still had things to say." They sat together on a couch as June tried to calm her nerves. "You know," Dorothy said softly, "when I started this whole thing, I was terrified. I thought the world had left me behind. But then someone lit a match inside me, just like you're doing now. This isn't about replacing anyone. It's about passing the flame. We don't need more heroes. We need more sparks." June exhaled, nodding slowly. "Will you stay for my talk?" she asked. Dorothy smiled. "Only if you promise not to apologize for being brilliant." That night, June spoke to a crowd of 6,000. She told her story, just like she had in that small classroom in Iowa. But this time, the world was watching. And she ended with a call that would soon spread across every major social platform. "We're not just building faster internet. We're building a future where no one has to feel left out of the conversation. Where a grandmother in Alabama can mentor a robotics team in Seattle. Where a retired firefighter can teach resilience to a teenager battling anxiety in New York. We're not just connecting people. We're rewriting what it means to belong." The audience rose in waves. Dorothy stood near the back, clapping quietly, proud beyond words. The summit ended with a candlelight ceremony, 3,000 people lighting tiny LED candles to represent every story, every breakthrough, every first step. When Dorothy was handed hers, she didn't raise it above her head. She passed it to a young man beside her, a nervous volunteer no older than 18. "You hold it now," she said. "This light belongs to you, too." Back in her town, things were quieter than ever. The trees still rustled in the wind. The post office still closed too early. But change was happening here, too. New volunteers had launched a tech co-op in the basement of the church. Carlos was teaching programming classes on Saturdays. Emma had started building a platform to help other towns launch second Signal chapters with zero cost. They were calling it Signal Seed. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the kitchen window, Dorothy sat down to write her final entry for the Porch Signals blog. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. "Dear friends. This isn't goodbye. This is pass it on. The world will always try to tell you what you can't do. That you're too old, too young, too rural, too late. But you know better now. You know that one spark can reach across space. That trying is enough. That stories matter. I may be stepping back, but I'll never stop believing in you. You've got the signal now. Keep it strong. Dorothy." The post went viral within the hour. It was translated into 5 languages. Framed in public libraries. Printed on coffee mugs, T-shirts, classroom walls. Because people weren't just hungry for hope, they were hungry for permission. Permission to be more than what they'd been told. And Dorothy gave them that. One spark at a time. From space, the satellite still moved, quiet, tireless, ordinary to most. But down below, across small towns and big cities, through living rooms, classrooms, nursing homes, prisons, and community centers, a different kind of signal pulsed forward. It didn't come from rockets or corporations. It came from someone like Dorothy. Someone like June. Someone like you. Someone who decided to try anyway. And in that trying, changed the world. Some mornings, Dorothy wakes before sunrise and walks to her porch, warmed only by the first hints of light. She watches the horizon slowly bloom, pink, gold, quiet, and she smiles because she still feels the pull of possibility. The world she helped ignite hasn't gone quiet. It's humming, quietly expanding, reaching further than she ever imagined. She has slowed down in some ways, but not in heart or spirit. She still writes occasional reflections for porch signals, though now she's sharing space with dozens of guest voices. She spends time building the Signal Seed initiative with Emma and Carlos, helping rural communities around the country launch their own chapters, each adapted to local culture and needs. She's rightfully proud of how adaptable the model has become: solar-powered hubs in native villages, mobile Wi-Fi units in Appalachian hollows, satellite-enabled art co-ops in flooded towns. Lately, though, her mornings have started with a different ritual. She opens her laptop and checks in on a Discord-style group called the Signal Keepers, a gathering of seniors and young people, volunteers and dreamers, mentors and newly lit sparks. Every day, someone posts a story: a budding writer in rural Mississippi finally publishing her first poem, a retired florist in Oregon teaching teenagers how to design virtual gardens for community centers, an ex-soldier in Michigan guiding middle schoolers in a makerspace. These stories are echoing through each other, leaping across zip codes, feeding one another. And Dorothy reads them with misty eyes and a grateful heart, because she knows this is how a movement sustains. One afternoon, her phone buzzes with an unexpected invitation: a letter from educators in Norway. Nordic schools are asking to partner with Second Signal, exchanging stories and video chats with seniors in the Midwest to explore culture, craft, and caring across continents. Dorothy leaned back in her chair, awed. This wasn't just a national movement anymore, it was global. The signal span oceans. That night, she calls Emma. They want a transatlantic exchange, she says, breathless. Grandmothers trading knitting patterns with Viking storytellers. Kids from two hemispheres learning history through memory. Emma grins in the static of the video call. Let's do it, she says. Let's light that spark, too. Meanwhile, Dorothy's still chair, the one she sat in during the kitchen table moments of her deepest doubt, is now a kind of symbol. It sits quietly in the corner, a gentle reminder that transformation often begins in humble places. Twice a year, a documentary crew sets up there, a short-form series called Signal Stories, at the table, with Dorothy inviting guests to share a moment of joy, loss, or change that shaped them. Seniors, children, teachers, refugees, veterans, all gathered in that same chair, a circle of lives. Dorothy listens, guiding their stories with softness and respect. The series now streams in multiple languages, with thousands tuning in weekly. One episode features a young man named Luis from a border town in Texas. He sits down and tells of being the first in his family to go to college, using community Wi-Fi hotspots and Dorothy's connections to live-stream lectures. Then he shares how he returned home to help others apply for financial aid through Zoom sessions with his local library. Dorothy listens, wiping a tear, and knows this is the kind of impact she dreamed of, but maybe never quite believed she'd witness. A few months later, Dorothy receives an email written with shaky handwriting: Dear Mrs. Reynolds, it's been 3 years since my husband passed away. For the first time, I walked into the local community center, thanks to the station you helped start, and taught a class called Stories of Home. We laugh, we cry, we remember. I feel alive again. Thank you. She rereads it and closes her eyes, thinking of her childhood library, of Walter's farm, of fading voices brought back by connection. She whispers, thank you, not just to the stranger but to the life she's been given and the chance to carry the signal forward. That signal carried her into unexpected spaces, too. One spring, she's invited by the Smithsonian to help curate an exhibit on technology as compassion. Her section features a video wall showing elderly volunteers teaching tech fluency to kids with special needs, satellite dishes Dewey at dawn, and Dorothy's own worn notebook with sketches and dreams drawn in ink and hope. Tour guides note how technology is often framed as efficiency, but here it's framed as empathy. In the opening week, an older visitor sees her notebook behind glass and weeps. My granddaughter left, she whispers. And reading Dorothy's story, I realized I can still reach out. I can still matter. That moment, unseen by most, is the heart of the exhibit, unseen, but powerful. At home, Dorothy's days are simple, warm with connection. She spends time in her garden, tending to perennials she and Walter planted decades before. She answers letters, prepares small toolkits for newcomers to signal seed, and chats with neighbors about dishes to share at the community potluck. One evening, a young neighbor from down the street stops by. She's 25, just lost her job in the city, and feeling adrift. Dorothy listens patiently as she speaks of disorientation and fear. When she finishes, Dorothy says, "It's okay to not have straight answers. The signal doesn't quit when you falter, it flickers. And flicker is enough to get noticed." The woman dries her eyes and stays to help Dorothy shell peas for that night's supper. When she leaves, she's smiling. News comes unexpectedly late one night. The United Nations has chosen second signal as one of 100 global innovations in social resilience. Dorothy reads the announcement under her porch light and exhales, overwhelmed. The recognition is lovely, but she thinks of the person in prison who felt useful again, of the teacher in Norway, of Louise still live-streaming lectures in Rio Vista, of the woman left adrift who's now planting seeds of her own. Those echoes matter more than any award. That winter, she receives a handwritten invitation from Elon Musk himself. It's not public. He writes, "Your spark changed more than your town, it changed what I believe is possible. I'd like to invite you to join a roundtable on aging innovation. Only if you'd like to. Just, thank you for believing we could all connect." Dorothy reads and laughs softly. She never thought she'd get a postcard from a man who once inspired her. But she remembers what matters more, that she once needed permission, and now she's giving it. She replies with 4 simple words, "I'll bring my chair." And so Dorothy moves forward, not because the path is clear, but because she knows one thing, the signal never dies. It echoes, across hearts, across distances, across generations. Because it isn't just about jets or networks. It's about courage. It's about telling someone they still belong. It's about that moment when someone just tries, and in trying, changes everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?